Severe thunderstorm activity eases off, but tropical cyclone activity expected to kick off this January 8th, 2024. So the thunderstorm threat has temporarily eased across Victoria and New South Wales, but we're now looking at a potential rain bomb across northern New South Wales and southern Queensland, and two potential tropical cyclones which could be lining up our tropics. All of that plus more in your latest forecast update. So stick around for the full 18 minutes to get your detailed weather forecast here. If you're new to us, please do consider subscribing and leave a like on the video while you're at it. We're 650 subscribers away from 10,000, which is a milestone number. But without any further ado, let's get into the forecast update. Taking a look at the national picture right now. Hot conditions in Australia's west, with daytime maxima today expected to reach 45 degrees in some locations. Storms across our north and also now across our east. Severe thunderstorms are possible this afternoon and evening into parts of central Queensland, and they're also possible tomorrow afternoon and evening. The rain and the storms in the southeastern quadrant of Australia should start to ease off by around mid-morning into early afternoon. They've had some tremendous rainfall totals there. Some places have picked up over 150 millimetres, and showers will ease off across Tasmania, and they'll contract the eastern coast later tonight into tomorrow morning. So we're going to take a look at this cyclone threat now. It's not for the next 5 days, it's sort of more to around the 5 to 10 day mark. However, in the next 10 days, the first area of interest, tropical low 03U, is a 25% chance of development, a moderate chance of formation. And then we've got another tropical low sort of area that we're watching in the Gulf of Carpentaria, which could extend off into the Coral Sea, which is a 5% chance of development. But I expect as more model consensus comes on board with that system, the chances will only be raised. So we're going to be keeping a very close eye on those two systems, because the western one could actually get quite strong, as we've seen in previous forecast model runs. So taking a look at the Access G3 rainfall run for the next 10 days nationwide, you can see the rainfall easing off across Australia's southeast and eastern coast, which is great news, but it only intensifies for the north as the monsoon trough really picks up, and you can already see the concentrated rainfall starting to occur in the Timor Sea with the start of that tropical cyclone. Also expecting a bit of rain in Australia's west, which should be some great news there before those cyclones really do start to wrap themselves up. And as I slow this forecast model run down, you can see the Access calling for a lot of rainfall over Australia's Kimberley region, and that is associated with that tropical cyclone, which becomes a tropical cyclone next weekend before moving inland and weakening off a little bit there. It is a weak tropical cyclone, but it's definitely a tropical cyclone in this forecast run, and it has the potential to move back over water maybe about mid next week, where it could intensify quite significantly in the Indian Ocean. So quite a strong and worrying system and forecast there. Now we're going to zoom into the tropics before we take a look at temperature and have a look at what these cyclones are expected to do. So this is Friday, and then we're heading into Saturday as per the ECMWF forecast. You can see that low pressure area spinning itself up north of sort of Western Australia around the Wyndham Kununurra sort of area, and then it moves inland just as it attains tropical cyclone status. So it remains very weak. However, it does look like it gets up towards that category 2 status, so it could definitely pack a couple of damaging wind gusts, that's for sure. And then towards the end of the 10-day forecast period, you can see that cyclone spinning up in the Coral Sea offshore from Cairns. Thankfully though, it doesn't seem like a cyclone threat towards Cairns at this time. So looking at the Access G3 temperature, you can just see hot weather expected to end off this week for Western Australia and even southwestern Australia. Actually, they're not getting any relief from the heat in form of sea breezes, so that's a little bit of bad news for people that don't like the hot weather down there, but it's certainly going to be some very good beach weather until at least early next week, before that heat starts to ease off a little bit Monday and into Tuesday, but still remaining very hot inland, where we could be seeing daytime maxima approach 46 degrees for some inland communities such as Meekatharra or Kalgoorlie. So we're going to take a look at the satellite imagery nationwide, or in the southeastern corner of the nation, just to wrap up this part of the video. But you can see a lot of convection blowing through, a lot of thunderstorm activity blowing across New South Wales at this time, and even though it's substantially weaker than it was yesterday, there's still some storms in there that could be packing heavy rainfall and damaging winds. So make sure you're staying vigilant and staying up to date with the Bureau of Meteorology. But let's take a look at the forecast models and see what's in store for your neck of the woods in the next 10 days. So I'm just going to start it off briefly by looking at the radar imagery across Victoria and New South Wales, because even though there's very limited thunderstorm activity, there's still a lot of rain activity moving through Canberra and the Great Dividing Range and approaching Sydney at this time, and also moving through Melbourne. There have been locations that have picked up to 180 millimetres, and there are also rivers at the major flood level. So there is definitely a flooding emergency occurring in Victoria and New South Wales at this time. So if you are in affected areas, especially across central Victoria, around Bendigo or Ballarat, and outside of Melbourne and approaching the Great Dividing Ranges over in the eastern half of Victoria, make sure you're staying vigilant and staying away from floodwaters and rivers that are expected to flood, and staying up to date with the Bureau of Meteorology, because this is a dangerous time for Victorians that are located around rivers, especially inland, because there are rivers that are flooding, and they are flooding beyond the major flood level. And remember, if it is flooded, forget it. Don't risk your life by crossing flooded roads or creeks, because it could very well be your last creek crossing. We've seen it time and time again, people attempting to do silly things in flooding situations, and you don't want to end up being a statistic. So make sure you're staying very safe and very vigilant in this flooding time. So we're going to take a look at the forecast models right now. I'm going to start off with the rainfall across the eastern part of Australia. You just got a brief glimpse of those cyclones up north that we're going to take a look at very shortly, but you can see there's still a substantial amount of rainfall occurring in Australia's eastern half across the Great Dividing Range, and that's going to ease off a little bit later on today, but it will contract over the Great Dividing Range by this evening, and we could still be seeing some heavy falls in northern New South Wales and also across southeastern Victoria around Omeo and down to Mallacoota, that sort of area. Just along the Victoria-New South Wales border, we could be seeing some substantially heavy rainfall, which could add a further 50 millimetres to some already very saturated catchments, which would not be good news over there, because we really don't need any more rain today, that's for sure. And as we play this run through again as we get into Tuesday, keeping track of time in the bottom half of your screen, you can see the rainfall completely eases off across New South Wales and Queensland, and also Victoria and Tasmania, and then tracks on over to New Zealand, where the Southern Island could pick up a substantial amount of rainfall from that cold front that's moving through. And just before we go and take a look at Northern Australia's cyclone situation, I'd like to also take a look at southern Victoria and that sort of area, eastern Victoria, and take a look at rainfall accumulation over the next 12 and 24 hours, because they're still expecting substantial amounts of rainfall today and into tomorrow, with another 50 millimetres expected in some locations on the western side of the Great Dividing Range, in those foothills there around Albury, basically in a line between Melbourne to Albury. Actually, we could be seeing some places pick up 50 millimetres or so, and also around the Mount Kosciuszko Peak, we could be seeing another 50 millimetres in some locations in New South Wales and the Australian Capital Territory. And in the next 24 hours, maybe a little bit more, maybe a further 30 millimetres added to that, for a total in some places up to 80 or 90 millimetres. And there's definitely one or two locations that have the potential to pick up to 100 millimetres of rain under the right thunderstorm. But thankfully, by around day 3, day 4, day 5, the rainfall really does ease off, and we could be seeing a little bit of sunshine there to dry out the river catchments after they reach their major flood level peaks, because there are rivers right now, especially around Bendigo, sort of to the southeast of Bendigo, that are at that major flooding level, which is concerning, because it's not often you see rivers flood to that degree across Victoria, and especially very close to Melbourne as well. I would not be surprised if a lot of flood water comes down through the Yarra and makes Port Phillip Bay significantly colder and significantly muddier, as if it isn't already. So yeah, keeping an eye on the water there would actually be very interesting. Because that will tell a very good story of how much rainfall is coming down through the Yarra River through Melbourne. But definitely not expecting a flooding situation through Melbourne, that's for sure. They've got some very good measures in place to prevent flooding, and I do not foresee any flooding situation whatsoever through Melbourne, that's for sure. And yeah, just taking a look, and we'll get to this later on in the video, there is also some significant rainfall totals expected across northern New South Wales and southern Queensland, and I'll break that down in the form of what looks to be a potential rain bomb a little bit later on in the video, so stay tuned for that. Now, this is where our focus shifts over to the tropics, because this is where a lot of stuff starts to happen with the tropics. A couple of days ago, I was talking about the MJO phase, which is currently located over sort of Mozambique, Madagascar, this sort of area, and that's driving tropical activity over here, which is why you see a lot of thunderstorm activity occurring here, and that's also why tropical cyclones are expected to form over here around Mauritius and that sort of area. Now, that doesn't have any direct impact on Australia yet. However, it will eventually, in about 5 days' time, start to drive tropical cyclone activity across the Australian region, starting off with the west and moving across the east because of its counterclockwise flow. And this tropical cyclone activity is what we see on the model runs by about next weekend. You can already see very much enhanced thunderstorm activity across Australia's north by Wednesday and into Thursday. And we could be seeing places pick up more than 100 millimetres in any 24-hour period. And there's also places that are expecting beyond 600 millimetres in the next 10 days. So a big amount of rainfall expected. And you can also see by next weekend, if I take a look at the pressure, there's already a tropical low with a pressure under 1,000 millibars starting to develop about 200 kilometres towards the southwest of Darwin. Now, it is no immediate cyclone threat to Darwin, which is good news because Darwin is a substantially populated metropolitan area, but it certainly could dump quite a lot of rainfall on Darwin itself. Now, you can see as we get into Sunday and into early next week, Monday morning, the cyclone does make landfall about 50 kilometres to the northeast of Carpentaria as probably what could be a Category 1. Yeah, it's definitely about a Category 1 tropical cyclone at this time. But interestingly enough, it looks like it strengthens a little bit as it gets over land. Now, that's not totally unprecedented across Western Australia and the Northern Territory because of the brown ocean effect, which is where these storms dump so much rainfall that they create inland seas for themselves to intensify over. So it's not unusual, but it's also a little bit interesting in the sense that we don't see it every single day. So you can see the cyclone intensifying a little bit over land, or at least holding its intensity actually, even though it's not located over water. And you can see in this picture, it's definitely probably a high-end Category 1 or Category 2 cyclone, delivering cyclone force conditions to basically anywhere between Kununurra up towards Darwin, which could be seeing 34-knot winds from this onshore flow through here. So it's still a reasonably strong storm and not one to be taken lightly, and it doesn't lose its intensity as it moves inland. Now, this is a concerning sign for basically anyone in this area here. Thankfully, it's not a populated part of the world, that's for sure, but it's concerning in the sense that so much rainfall is possible from a storm like this when we're seeing rainfall totals of around 25 millimetres an hour held over one location for 3 or 4 days. So if we take a look at rainfall accumulation over the next 5 days, probably only about 50 to 100 millimetres, but over the next 10 days is where we start to see the ridiculous totals. Widespread 250 millimetres. Most places around here will be getting more than 500 millimetres. Kununurra up to 1,000 millimetres of rain. And I mean, take a look at this. Over the ocean, 1,500 millimetres of rain. So huge volumes of rainfall are expected where this cyclone makes passage, because it's going to be slow moving and relatively wet in the sense that it's going to have a lot of thunderstorm activity around the centre. But headlining this is just tremendous amounts of rainfall across the Kimberley region and in parts of the Northern Territory. Hopefully not around Darwin. However, it probably will end up dropping a significant amount of rainfall, 500 millimetres or so on Darwin. Thankfully, it remains very much a coastal situation, so it's not going to be a huge flooding emergency for inland parts of this neck of the woods in Australia, but it certainly could be a significant flooder in the sense that it will drop a lot of rainfall in locations around Daly River, Kununurra, Wyndham, Columbaroo, that sort of area. And we could be seeing some inland seas as a result of this system, which is something that we really need to be taking seriously, because it could shut off roads all up in this part of Australia for a very long time. We've seen it before last year when the rain sat itself over Broome for a couple of days, and we just saw roads being cut off around Fitzroy Crossing, Halls Creek, that sort of area. It was a definite flooding emergency up in Western Australia's Kimberley, and we could be seeing pretty much a repeat situation of that. So I've switched it over to the Access G3 forecast, which is the Bureau of Meteorology's forecast. Now, once again, they're saying tremendous amounts of rainfall, but what concerns me the most about seeing 1,500 millimetres again on their forecast is the fact that it lines up very nicely with the Eastern Riviera forecast, and that's model consistency, which basically means the chances of this happening are dramatically increased. The GFS model generally doesn't get rainfall that well or that accurately because it's a lower resolution model, but still it's calling for a lot of rainfall across the Timor Sea, thankfully not over land. But what I can say from these two model runs with pretty high certainty is that this cyclone is a very likely situation to happen. Even if it only makes it to like a tropical low status, it's a very likely situation to have happen, and it's also a situation where it's very likely it will drop a lot of rainfall, and I cannot rule out certain locations picking up 1,500 millimetres in a 7-day period for basically anywhere along the coast from Darwin, maybe even over to Derby in Western Australia. So we'll be watching this one very closely because a lot of rainfall is expected, and it's likely that the dams up here will fill, the rivers will fill, for the first time this summer of 2024. The wind threat from this cyclone doesn't remain too dramatic. I'm not seeing anything absolutely outrageous, especially considering that this is a region of the world built for tropical cyclones and strong tropical cyclones at that. I'm sort of only seeing about 34 to 40 knots in most places here, and that's mainly offshore as well, so it's a weak Category 1 cyclone. However, what we will need to be watching is if the cyclone, as per the Access G3 model, manages to track across the Kimberley and then re-emerge over in the Indian Ocean around here. Right now, it doesn't look like it's going to do that. However, previous forecasters have said that the cyclone will re-emerge off the coast, and then it'll have a very good chance and a very good shot at rapid intensification in the Indian Ocean, where the conditions are absolutely primed for tropical cyclone intensification. And I will take a look at that right now. Sea surface temperatures, briefly, very, very warm up here, 31, 32 degrees Celsius, and in some spots very close to the coast you could be seeing a spot or two of 33 degrees Celsius, so almost unprecedentedly warm. This is bath water here, and the warmer the sea surface temperatures are, the more thunderstorm activity the cyclone can blow up, which means the more rainfall and the more dangerous thunderstorms wrapping around the storm center, which will likely lead to the cyclone intensifying. So that's a bit of a concerning sign, considering there is so much fuel for this tropical cyclone to utilize on its intensification. So I'm going to dive back down across to Australia's east, because we also need to take a look at the threat of rainfall across Australia's east coast, because there is a lot of rainfall expected basically around Coffs Harbour up towards the Gold Coast and stuff. Now, it was back down on yesterday's forecast. However, you can still see one or two locations expecting up to 250 millimetres in the next 10 days, which is a substantial amount of rainfall, and in the sense that it's going to be from a steady flow next weekend and into early next week, from just this rain band that moves ashore and sits on the sort of Coffs Harbour sort of area for about what looks to be maybe 3 or 4 days. We could be seeing some isolated, very heavy rainfall, where in one calendar day we could be seeing maybe up to 150 millimetres in some locations, which would definitely cause some minor flooding in certain locations. So we'll be watching this situation closely as well on the Force 13 AU channel, because it's important that we get a full scope of the picture in terms of Australian weather. But one place that we really don't need to be looking at is certainly Western Australia, because there is nothing interesting apart from this cyclone up north. It's just going to be hot and hot across Australia's west coast, and maybe the chance of a bit of rain from thunderstorms next week or next weekend, where we could be seeing maybe 25 millimetres drop in some locations around the wheat belt, but nothing for Perth. So the reprieve to the drought that's currently going on over there is not coming anytime soon, I'm sorry to say. But yeah, that basically does it for the weather forecast. I'll wrap it up by taking a final look at the rainfall accumulation, as if we haven't looked at it enough already. But you can see just huge amounts of rainfall expected from the tropical cyclone expected up here, and also the tropical low expected in the Coral Sea. There will be one or two places on the Queensland coast that pick up another 250 millimetres. Thankfully, the flooding has well and truly eased off around Cairns and Port Douglas, so it's safe to say that they can have a little bit more rainfall. Definitely not 2,000 millimetres more rainfall, but they can definitely have another 200 millimetres without causing a secondary flooding emergency. So I'm not seeing any alarm bells here that would be cause for calling a flooding emergency potential over in Queensland's top end, which is very good news indeed, because I imagine that they are well and truly sick of flooding for at least the next decade in the wake of Tropical Cyclone Jasper. Now, I will also say the next tropical cyclone name on the Australian naming list is Kirrily. So if you do live in the northern parts of Western Australia and the Northern Territory, make sure you're listening out for the name of Tropical Cyclone Kirrily, because it will likely come in the form of this tropical low here, maybe on Saturday or Sunday if it does get to cyclone status. The Bureau of Meteorology has a 20% chance of it becoming a cyclone. We've got it as a 25% chance, and I imagine it's only going to increase from there. So make sure you're staying up to date with them, and make sure you're watching the weather warnings and also the weather watchers, and keep a close eye on the rainfall as well, because rainfall looks like it's going to be the most significant threat from this tropical cyclone. And I can't really reiterate that enough, in the sense that cyclones like this, very slow moving and even weak ones, can pack such a significant punch, that's for sure. But anyway, that is the latest that I have on the Australian weather situation. If you're brand new here, please do be one of the final people to subscribe before we hit 10,000 subscribers. It's a massive milestone for us, and I'd love to have your support. But that's all for me. I'll catch you all in the next storm. Goodbye.
Thank you for watching our content this update. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe to get more updates covering all things weather and geophysics impacting Australia and the Oceania region. Subscribe to our other channels for more content from across the network, and be sure to check out our website where you can find free access to floater and radar imagery and articles on everything weather and much more. If you wish to support us directly, you can purchase some of our merchandise. We have a wide variety of clothing and homeware, or you could become an Ultimate Fan, which is the best way to directly support us, granting you some sweet perks and offers, including features in our custom storm animations, live streams, and much more.